What's up, YouTube? It is I, Rye, with the Rye Report, but this time we're doing it a little bit different. I have my acquaintance, my friend, whatever you want to call him, Umso. Some people may remember him as David Yugioh, the Crystron God.
Daniel, what you?
Daniel Yugioh, close enough. I just know him as Umso these days. But he is joining me for this Rye Report to talk about tier lists, meta, and other exciting things. Umso, how you doing, bro?
I'm fine, thanks. Thank you for letting me be here. I'm
Of
hyped to talk about some tier lists and how we rate some others. Because
There you
as
go.
we are able to see, they are not the same at all.
Yeah, they're not the same, and there's usually background philosophies that go into why certain tier lists look the way they are. Why don't you tell me how you base your tier lists whenever you make them?
So I suppose we can start off with tier 1. And how I categorize tier 1 is the decks to beat, which in my eyes is Harpies and Melodious. Some people say Melodious tier 2 because they are lose to Harpies, but I think because of how Melodious and Harpies interact with other decks in the format, they have it pretty easy against other decks, given how some of the matchups look like, which is why, for example, I have both of them there, and like my tier 2 doesn't exist, which is I categorize tier 2 as decks which are weaker to tier 1, because like they are important, but they have certain issues uh, in some matchups against tier 1, and tier 3 is just decks which are great but lose hard to some sided cards like Necro Valley or aren't consistent enough. And Rogue is just decks which have the hands to like deal with everything technically, but they lack heart and the consistency in other departments.
There you go. And of course, if you watched my content for a while, you know the way I do my tier list usually tends to be more statistical, tends to be based on the power ranking, although the Rye Report does take a more kind of intermediate approach. So it's between power rankings. It's more a little bit more on the prediction side, but ultimately it's based on those predictions. For example, if we went purely on statistics, Melodious would be like a tier 3 or rogue deck, which obviously isn't the case because we both know Melodious keeps out most of the meta, like decks that would be meta, like Blue Eyes and stuff like that. But at the same time has not been performing well. That's where the Rye Report kind of comes in and plugs the gap when it comes to certain decks. So let's just get into this right away. Harpy Ladies, we both agree is tier 1.
Definitely the deck to beat, the strongest deck. There's nothing else to
Holy crap,
really
dude.
complain. Like we
Yeah,
have a ton of decks which are just like, okay, I want to play my engine, I want to play my Freak Book of Moon, and Sun takes off the choice, and that's Harpies is the best at abusing it, so there's nothing else really which can compete with it.
for the most part, I agree. Harpy Ladies, they're just way too more, and I really think it just comes down to the field spell, kind of destroying the back row decks that could potentially stop it if they actually have to play the Harpy's hunting ground in the deck and search for it. But
Yeah,
they're just the best, man. They're just the best at everything, every
the field
situation.
spell is really broken. It just makes Swallow's Nest not only an engine piece, but also in
Yeah,
disruption, because you can just play through interruptions. And we don't really have any decks which can do it like that. No decks
yeah.
which can either play through things and also abuse those attacks as good as them, especially since they have a draw card, which no other deck on the tier list actually has.
There you go. And I think it was -1 that said, or maybe it was PDS. It was either PDS or -1. They said that Harpies, like every other deck, has to play through like some sort of floodgate. But Harpies, as long as they have Harpies hunting ground up, they just normal summon, and there you go. Their floodgate is outed. They don't have to deal with
Yeah,
poisonous sword.
unless there's like two poisonous in that case, good
Yeah, or
luck.
something crazy. Yeah. Melodious. So I'm one of the people that put Melodious as tier 2 purely because of representation purposes. When you look at top 8 data, top 32 data, it's just overwhelmingly Harpy. So I don't put them on the same list, but you do. So tell me a little
Yeah,
bit about Melodious, even though they've had kind of a downswing lately.
yeah, Melodious is very weird. So, like I already mentioned at the beginning of the video, we have a very interesting symbiotic relationship with Harpies. On the one hand, Harpies of course wins against Melodious
Mm,
most of the time. But because Harpies exist, a lot of decks aren't able to cite cards which are actually good against them. Cards like Karma Cut can't be in the format simply because they would be too weak against Harpies. And Melodious is able to abuse it as a result. And also, it differentiates enough compared to Harpies, as such it can play cards such as Kill Prison, and also has hand traps, which Harpy doesn't have. And I think because it like is different enough compared to Harpies, while also being able to abuse bounce off of each other, as like already mentioned, decks can't play Karma Cut because of good old friend Melodious, but a lot of people have to play now cards such as Chalice and Breakthrough Skill, and Harpies is able to abuse that. And because of that, I think, because they're able to abuse each other good enough, I think they can be called both tier 1, even if like Melodious loses to Harpies. That's the biggest argument against Melodious tier 1 is it loses to the best deck, and as such, it cannot be tier 1.
So does
But I
everything else,
personally
though.
think, but I personally think that's not a good reason to like argue against the deck. And that's why I personally have it at tier 1 and nothing in tier 2.
Okay, okay. Oh, I should also mention, whenever people put things in no tier 2, because that's something that confuses a lot of new players. How can there not be a no tier 2 deck? Because we've done that before too, where there's just nothing in tier 2. Usually for me, the gap is just so wide that I don't feel comfortable saying anything is even close to the best tier 1. How do you indicate when something is tier 2 or when there's no tier 2?
Similarly, that there is just a big difference in power difference between them. Or not necessarily power difference. Some decks have the power, but Harpies, for example, can just sack a lot of decks, and some decks are just slower. Like if we like look at our tier 3, we have decks like Magnets in there.
Yeah.
And Magnets is honestly a really decent deck. It has a good ways to deal with both matchups, like a Gone and Guardian exists, which can deal with a Bloom Diva. It also can tag out if like Slash attempts to pop. But it can be sacked very easily by Harpies because they are rather slow. They need a turn to set up. And if Harpies opens up with something like Swallow's Nest, Channeler, and a Harpy monster, they can just break through everything Magnets might set up and just win outright. Even though Magnets might have a decent enough hand to like deal with other decks.
There you go. That's actually funny. We should talk about the tier because for a long time, my tier list, my tier 3, I called it the Destiny Draw tier because it was just a bunch of Destiny Draw decks. But this time it's actually changed up. I used to have Water tiered, but lately Water has started going down, 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 which is predictable. Usually Water falters after the meta starts to settle. And then we have Yosinju and Magnets I have in tier 3 because of their... But even those decks, right? Like Yosinju used to be like a super trap-heavy deck. It's not anymore. You don't really see... You see Yosinju Sword Sting, maybe Flood Drowning, and the rest are all hand traps and quick
the
plays.
hand traps are just great against Slash and against the Diva, which is how it's able to really abuse it. Because on the one hand, you can just use Karma 1 and also Yosenju... Oyam, was it? To just gain pluses all the time. And as long as you have one hand trip, you will survive. It doesn't matter how much Harpies might set up. You will very likely survive with one hand trip unless they have like triple Swallow's Nest or something ridiculous.
Which they always have, let's be real.
Yeah, not wrong, not wrong.
The other thing is, so Lunalights, you have Lunalights actually as a tier 3 deck. I put it as a rogue deck because we honestly don't even see it in tournament play anymore. But you do sometimes see like the one sneak in. And they do have a good... Harpy matchup. We actually saw in the Konami Invitational, some people picked up Lunalights. Do you really think they're tier 3, or do you think they're kind of on the like where are they in tier 3? Top of top tier 3, low top tier 3?
Low tier 3, high rogue. I personally think they are good enough for tier 3 because people have to respect it. Especially Harpies has to respect it while going into a tournament, and they have to side for it. And as such, because you have to respect it, I think it deserves a spot on the tier list simply because you can't go into a tournament and say, okay, I'm not going to face the deck. There is no reason to worry about it. And as long as you have to worry about the deck, I think it deserves to be called a tier-worthy deck.
Okay. That's fair. That's a fair outlook. You also have Gaia's tier 3. I actually had Gaia's tier 3 for a long time, but I recently dropped them to Rogue. Funny enough, the week I dropped them to Rogue, they won a tournament, which is pretty funny. But
karma. That's what you call karma.
That's what you call karma. It's always been an interesting deck because Gaia is kind of one of those decks that kind of can define a metagame, especially no hand traps or anything in the battle phase, stuff like that. But not as many people play it these days. What do you think about Gaia?
It's just a very solid deck. It just sits on its one boss monster, sets some traps. It's what I would call a poor man's Harpies version, but it also has a decent Harpy matchup because it can, in fact, pop the field spell. But it isn't able to really pop off such as Harpies with multiple Swallow's Nest, opening up Oracle, and other crazy stuff. And as such, I think it's just good enough because it summons with one boss monster. It's very good at doing that. And because it has still access to 2 TTH, unlike Harpies, it's just good enough to compete with other issues. And it's also just decent in some matchups. For example, Yusendrus. There are no hand traps, so you don't have to worry about it, and that's one of the main reasons for them. And similarly, it also has a decent matchup against Melodious because they can't really touch each other, but eventually Gaia will draw into Chalice or beat Breakthrough Skill or Fiendish Chain and just win on that spot.
There you go. And here's the controversial one. This is the one that's going to get people to click the video. The deck that just came out, everyone's talking and raving about it and how good it is, how bad it is. That's right, Umso. I'm talking about Noble Knights. No, I'm just kidding. I'm talking about DDD.
Yeah.
Oh man,
Triple D.
Triple D. It's weird when I look at DDD because the content creator in me wants to say tier 3. Look at how many tops it's gotten, which to be fair has gotten a lot of tops. But the one thing that is concerning me, like a lot, is they usually all die before they reach top 8. And there'll usually be like one guy that makes it to finals. Do you think there's a lot of hype in DDD? It seems to have a good matchup against Harpies. I think it's at least tier worthy, being able to get to finals 3 times in a week. I think just statistically, it's technically in the metagame, but you put it as rogue. Tell me a little bit about DDD.
Well, on the theory, it's a really good deck, but where it's just struggles is the side deck. There are so many cards which are just great against MST. Depending on the hand, just Necro Valley, Mind Drain, and Non-Fusion Area can just also be BS against it, because the hands depend a lot on Swirl Slime. Like if they go second, you can just flip up Mind Drain and they just cry unless they have All-Throws, which is why it can be so weird. Like on the one hand, okay, as long as I open up Gate and Swirl Slime plus another DDD, I will be able to play. But when you will be sacked, even if your deck list is fine. And similarly, people don't really know how to play against it yet. That's a big factor for it.
That's fair.
But it also doesn't really have great of a matchup against Melodious, because Schuberta just banishes 3 cards from the graveyard, including Swirl Slime. And once Swirl Slime is gone, you can't really extend with it. It has an amazing Harpy matchup. That's the best part about it. Once you pop the field spell with Orphreus or Dark Contract with a Witch, you will be able to just sit for a bit and just wait until you outgrind them, or just summon a big Alexander and just push for lethal. But because it just has this issue with Melodious, even if it didn't show up that much in recent time, because people were either testing other decks or playing Harpies to win, it was able to perform. But I think a lot of people will go back to the deck to keep, on the one hand, DDD in check, but also be able to just check a lot of other rogue decks which are trying to rise, but won't be able to, because Diva is such a big issue for a lot of them.
There you go. Yeah, we'll have to see where DDD goes, because from a statistics standpoint, they're doing very well in terms of topping, but their top 8 rate has been very kind of abysmal. So they're not going to top the power ranking, but they'll definitely be on there, I think, which will be interesting to see how the weeks go up from there. Anything else on this tier list that we really got to talk about? Anything I missed?
I think not really. I mean, the only thing which is different to me is that I still have TG on there.
Oh, yeah. TG actually won one of our tournaments, so I was considering putting it on here, but I have this mantra of one tournament doesn't equal tier list immediately. But you might be right. TG actually might be a tier 3 deck right now. They look kind of nuts.
I mean, as long as they pop off, they have a potential to sack, which is one of the main things the deck needs to have in this format, sadly. Yeah. The ability to just go ham, which it has with Charge. But of course, like, Harpies exists and is a big issue for it. Mm-hmm. Like, if it goes, like, it's a very much something like Magnets needs a turn to set up. Of course, like, you can open up a hand which just goes ham with 1 card, Charge, Milling Misk, and a Milling also Serpent, and then you just special summon a bunch of times. But when that won't happen that often, it's similarly to Magnets, just can be sacked, but can also sack. And I think as a result, it's fine to put in there, because a lot of people are siding Necro Valley, specifically for those rogue decks like Magnets, like TG. And similarly, because people respect Lunalight and because people respect those 2 decks and side for it, I put it on there.
There you go. Sounds good. Full Power Crystron, if they are back, where'd they be on the tier list? Tier 0?
Well, very likely. Like you have Impact and Ray that in all the decks you can't do anything about it. Like what are you gonna do? Broadface Book of Moon? Okay, cool. Chain Impact. And then okay, you attempt to OTK me. Okay, cool. C3 into a Matrix. GG
Oh
Nori.
god. All right. Okay. Okay, dude. That's Umso. I'm gonna post his Twitter down in the description. His Twitch. Any shout outs, Umso?
Well, thank you for having me here once again, and thank you for everyone who has joined me over the last 2 months on my journey with Twitter and Twitch.
Hey.
And I hope it will be even better. And I suppose see you until next time.
There you go, boys. Tell me your opinions. Tell me which tier list you like more. Tell me which tier maybe you don't even like either tier list. Maybe you want to make your own tier list. Put it down in the comments. Tell
Which
Umso
is
to make
fair. Everyone is allowed to have their own opinion.
exactly. I always tell people never look at one opinion, one tier list. You should take all the data and then form your own opinion from there. Or you could just wait for the power rankings because you just literally wait and see what happens with the meta, every Monday. Tell me if you and guys enjoyed Umso. I'd be happy to have him back if you guys enjoyed his analytics. That's really it. Till next week. See you later, YouTube. Peace out.